Welcome to episode 7 of the Terra Parva show. Today we're going to be talking about tissue culturing. Now, tissue culturing is one of those hot button topics. And the reason for that is because in the plant industry, there's some people that really don't like it because, it has allowed major industry players to mass produce plants that were otherwise very expensive because they're very slow growing, and they can now produce them by the thousands. But so far as the vivarium and terrarium industry and even aquarium industry, it's something that is highly desirable. And for somebody with a strong science background like myself and somebody that used to run a tissue culturing laboratory, particularly for physiological work, yes, I love tissue culturing. I think it is the next best thing next to sliced bread, so to speak. So tissue culturing has a lot of benefits to it. We can take a very tiny piece of tissue, and with that we can grow an entire plant, an entire organism that can then be put into vivarium, terrarium, aquarium. In that way, we can actually take a organism that typically we could only subdivide into maybe 2 or 3 other smaller organisms without reducing its chances of survivability. And we can actually make it into 100, sometimes 200, 300 cultures that will then grow identical cloned plants. And so it's really nice for mass production of desirable plants. But that's only one of the main benefits of it. That's a benefit for the industry. That's a benefit for the grower or the business, is that you can take a desirable plant and you can clone it by the thousands. And it's something that is very knowledge heavy. It's very equipment heavy. It's very expertise heavy. But at the same time, it's very little maintenance. Because once you set it in the agar gel, you set it on the shelf under the proper lighting that is automated, and you just allow it to grow for months until it's ready for sale. You don't have to water it. You don't have to fertilize it. You don't have to worry about pests. It's its own self-contained little environment. Now, the reason that people really love tissue cultures in our industry, in vivariums, terrariums, aquariums, is because so many times we have issues with pests, with issues with biosecurity. There are fungi, there are viruses, there are bacteria, all kinds of things that we do not want in our terrariums, vivariums, aquariums. When you're talking about vivariums, if you want to be absolutely 1,000% safe and never have to worry about getting a plant that has chytrid on it that could infect your amphibians, well, you can turn to tissue cultures. And tissue cultures, you don't have to worry about that with. It's the same thing if you have a expensive plant collection. Some people put thousands of dollars worth of plants in a terrarium or vivarium, and they don't want to accidentally get some snail eggs in there. That those snails, when they hatch, they're going to start munching down on those expensive plants because they don't care if it's a $5 plant or a $5,000 plant. It's all food to them. So tissue cultures are an amazing way to uphold biosecurity without having to really think much about it. You get in these completely sterile cultures other than the living organism. That's the one thing that's non-sterile, right? It's one thing that's living. But otherwise, it's a sterile culture. It's a monoculture. You don't have to worry about any kind of contaminants. And the nice thing about that is that you can really plug in all these different tissue cultures, and over time they will grow as large as you want them to. No, you're not going to start out with a huge plant, but at the same time, everything grows as long as you don't kill it in the meantime. But with that being said, tissue culturing also offers other advantages. And that's primarily that you can actually get a whole bunch of them and put them in a vivarium at one time without having to go through the quarantine process either. Again, because they are clean. Now, tissue cultures do sometimes, oftentimes cost more than the non-tissue cultured plants. But again, this biosecurity that you're going to be getting, the ability to put these plants in there without worry of any kind of contaminants whatsoever, is really worth the money. Now, we've got to discuss how tissue culturing is different from aquaculturing, is different from regular culturing, just farming of these plants. So let's use moss as an example. So typically with moss, if you're just growing it, well, you can grow it outside, right? But typically if you're growing it outside, then you have to worry about a lot of different pests. Some people do grow mosses in greenhouses and trays. If you grow them inside, you have less issues with pests, but you still have to worry about pests, and you have to worry about, fungi and bacteria, just like you do outside. It's just to a lesser extent. Aquaculturing is the same way. Aquacultured mosses are still going to have pests in them. They are still a lot of times going to have snails in them. They're going to have bacteria, good or bad bacteria. They're going to have fungi in them. They could potentially have viruses in them, although rare. When you get a tissue cultured moss, you don't have to worry about any of that. It is completely free of any of those issues that could potentially pop up and wreck your very nice, very expensive vivarium. So I personally love tissue cultures. Again, from the industry standpoint, that you can mass produce something thousands of times over, and it's very low maintenance. But at the same time, I also like that peace of mind that I can take something and put in my vivarium and don't have to worry about the biosecurity aspect. Now, you may be wondering, well, can't a tissue culture be infected with something? Can't it be contaminated? And the answer is yes. But the nice thing about a tissue culture is that a tissue culture shows contamination so quickly, so easily. And I will say that whenever a tissue culture has any kind of contamination, you can generally tell within about 1 to 2 weeks, and you can definitively 1,000% tell before that goes to market. So you can confidently say, when you do sell a tissue culture, that it is free of any kind of pests, any type of bacteria, fungi, etc. that you'd have to worry about, because otherwise it would show. Now, people wonder, how are these tissue cultures made? Well, I'll give you a brief summary, and that's that these tissue cultures are generally made with a nutrient agar media. That agar can also have antibiotics put into it that will kill off any kind of potential contamination. It will also sometimes have different hormones in it that will cause the little plantlet to root more vigorously or to grow more vigorously. There are a lot of ways you can tune tissue cultures for whatever type of plants, so far as the nutrient formulations, or whatever you want to do to protect those tissue cultures. Again, if you're somebody that's having issues with like fungal contamination, you could put particular chemicals in there that will kill off any type of fungi. Now, I personally, when I made tissue cultures, I did not use any type of antibiotics. I did not use any type of antifungals, because for me, yes, that is something that is done in a lot of mass-producing laboratories that have perhaps some inexperienced lab techs that are working on those things. But I am extremely careful, and for me to have to use those would just essentially make up for sloppiness. I did not like that. I would rather have excellent technique to make sure that my cultures are properly sterilized and properly inoculated with plant tissue without any kind of contamination. And if I'm sloppy enough to have any kind of contamination, then I need to know about it so I can improve my technique. Now, I will say also that these tissue cultures are a lot harder to make than what fungal cultures are. And the reason for that is because fungal cultures, the fungi, have mycotoxins. Those mycotoxins they can use to kill off bacteria and other fungi. So sometimes, a lot of time, you can actually be kind of sloppy making some mushroom cultures and still be perfectly okay, because the mycelium will just consume the spores or the bacterial cysts of whatever kind of contaminants are in there, and you never notice it. When you're doing plant tissue cultures, you have to be vastly more careful, vastly more skilled, just because the slightest bit of contamination, I'm talking about the most, just one single bacterial cyst, one single fungal spore will contaminate the entire culture, and it's all trash. Because since it is a monoculture, when anything germinates in there, it does not have any kind of competition, and so it just takes over and oftentimes kills off the plant or otherwise presents itself in a way that looks very visually unappealing. So anyways, that's the main reason, though, that tissue culturing is kind of like a few cuts above the sterile techniques needed for mycological work, because unless you are using those antibiotics, unless you're using those antifungals, which, again, I would rather have good technique than rely on those for, yes, those plants have no defense system. And so any kind of contamination is just going to obliterate them. And I have had some times in the past where I have had contaminated cultures, and I would think back and say, oh, you know what? My hand just slightly for 1 second slipped between the flow hood and that agar culture that I was working with, and I must have had a single fungal spore on my glove, and that's what got in there, and that's what contaminated it. Usually I can track it down, and I would continue to refine my techniques. It's a good part of training. Quite frankly, if I were to put a lot of antibiotics, antifungals in them, I feel like I would become a little bit lazy with my technique, because then I would be depending upon those, and I wouldn't really see the true extent of the expertise that I have, the skill that I have with inoculating these cultures. But anyways, guys, I hope that answers all the questions that you'll have about tissue cultures. If you have any other questions, please let me know. But I'll go ahead and wrap this up with saying that no, tissue cultures, there's really no drawbacks other than you may start out with a slightly smaller, slightly more expensive plant. But the peace of mind that you get from not having to worry about any kind of pests is just, it's an amazing thing. Because there's been so many times that I have had $100 begonias destroyed by snails, or I've had nematines to get into tanks when I was first starting out. And I just got to a point where, again, I would rather have an ounce of prevention than a pound of cure. Because, yes, it's a little bit of added expense on the front. It's a little bit of I guess a little bit of added trouble tracking down these particular tissue cultures that you'd want to use, but it really saves a lot of headaches in the end. So anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'll be talking with you all again soon. Take care.